I'm 57 years old today, and as I sit by the window of my small but cozy living room, watching the golden light of evening pour across the street, I can't help but think about the long, winding road that brought me here. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from, because what I'm about to share is not just my story. It's a story of survival, faith, and the lessons life forces us to learn. Sometimes the hardest way possible. I was born into what many would call privilege. My name is Eleanor Grace, though back then, everyone just called me Ellie. My parents were the backbone of our family's legacy. My father, Richard Grace, a shrewd but kind businessman, and my mother, Margaret, who had a warmth that could soften the coldest day. I was the eldest of 3 children. My brother Daniel was 5 years younger than me, and little Sarah came 7 years after me. I grew up in a big white house sitting on the edge of a hill, its garden sprawling with roses and magnolias, its windows tall and shining with laughter that seemed to fill every corner of our lives. As the oldest, I felt like the second mother in the house. I braided Sarah's golden hair, wiped Daniel's muddy shoes, and told them stories before bed. My parents often reminded me, "Ellie, you're our little leader." Back then, I thought it was just words. But those words would one day become my anchor. Our family was close-knit, and though we were well off, my parents raised us with values, not arrogance. Sundays meant church and then family dinner around the long oak table. My father always sat at the head with Mother opposite him, while we children sat in the middle. Those meals weren't just about food. They were about love, discipline, and lessons whispered through laughter. I still remember how my mother's hand smelled faintly of lavender when she passed the bread. How my father's deep laugh echoed when Daniel tried to tell a joke that made no sense at all. Life felt unshakably till the night everything changed. It was springtime, and my parents had been invited to a charity gala in the city. They kissed us goodnight, dressed in their finest. My father in a black suit, my mother with pearls around her neck that caught the light like stars. I stayed up later than usual, reading under the dim glow of a lamp, until I finally drifted off. What I didn't know then was that it would be the last night I ever heard the sound of their footsteps in the hallway at dawn. A knock thundered at our front door. I remember the way it rattled through the quiet house, startling me awake. When I opened it, our driver stood there, face ashen, hat crushed in his hands. Behind him, I saw the flashing lights of a police car. My heart sank. I knew. Before he even spoke, I knew. "Miss Eleanor," he stammered, voice breaking. "There was an accident. The car. It lost control on the bridge. Your parents. They didn't make it." The words sliced through me like a blade. I collapsed against the doorframe, gasping for air as my world shattered. Daniel came stumbling down the stairs, rubbing his eyes, asking what was wrong. Sarah clung to the banister, her teddy bear hanging limp in her little hand. They were too young to understand. But their lives had just been torn apart too. That morning was the beginning of a nightmare that would haunt us for years. But grief wasn't the only shadow that crept into our lives. Because behind the veil of tears, betrayal was waiting, betrayal from the very person we should have been able to trust. My father's younger brother, Edward Graysour, Uncle Edward, was the man everyone called dependable, charming, and devoted to family. He stepped in immediately, his arms open wide, telling neighbors, lawyers, and church members that he would protect us. At the funeral, he stood beside us, a hand on my shoulder, speaking like a man carrying the weight of responsibility. He gave long speeches about honoring my parents' legacy, about families sticking together, but behind his kind eyes and comforting words, greed was lurking like a wolf dressed in sheep's clothing. The day after the funeral, I overheard him speaking in hushed tones with one of the lawyers in Father's study. His voice, sharp and impatient, carried through the hall. "Their assets, their estates should all come under my management. Eleanor is just a child. She can't possibly handle any of this." Something about the way he said it chilled me. I was 17, not a child anymore, but to him, that made me vulnerable. And vulnerable was exactly what he wanted me to be. At first, his changes were subtle. He had us moved from our family home into a smaller townhouse for safety and practicality. He dismissed longtime staff members, people who loved us, and replace them with strangers loyal to him. He told me it was for the best, that he was simplifying our lives. But I noticed the jewelry that disappeared from my mother's drawers, the art that was quietly taken off the walls. I saw bank statements arrive with numbers that made no sense. Accounts drained and transferred. When I asked questions, he smiled and patted my hand. "Don't worry, Ellie. Uncle Edward knows best. You just focus on school and your siblings. Leave the hard stuff to me." But deep down, I knew. He wasn't protecting us. He was stripping us bare. One evening, months later, I found Sarah crying in her room. She was clutching the locket our mother had given her, the last thing she owned that hadn't vanished. She looked up at me, eyes wide and scared. "Ellie, is Uncle going to take this too?" Her voice was trembling. That was the moment I swore to myself I would not let him steal everything. Not our memories, not our future. Still, what could I do? I was 17, suddenly thrust into the role of a parent protector and guardian for Daniel and Sarah. I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, holding their hands while the ground beneath us cracked and crumbled. We were alone, scared and grieving, while the man meant to protect us was quietly orchestrating our ruin. I didn't know it then, but those years would shape me into someone stronger than I ever believed I could be. The betrayal that was meant to destroy us would one day become the fire that forged us. But in that moment, all I had was my promise. I would keep my siblings safe no matter what it took. After my parents' funeral, the world felt like it had lost all its color. Days bled into nights and nights into mornings. I woke every day with a weight on my chest, heavier than anything I'd ever carried. Grief doesn't just sit quietly at claws, it presses. It steals your breath. But grief wasn't my only burden. I had two young souls looking at me, waiting for me to be strong when I felt weakest. Daniel was 12, restless and angry, lashing out at teachers and snapping at me, though I knew it was his way of coping with pain. Sarah, only 10, clung to me like a shadow, her wide eyes searching mine for reassurance. And then there was Uncle Edward, always lurking in the background, smiling with that polished charm, convincing everyone he was a savior, when in truth, he was stripping us of everything we had. I wanted to believe that maybe I was wrong. Maybe grief was twisting my perception. But every week, another piece of our old life disappeared. The grand house we grew up in, sold my father's company, signed over to Edward's name under the guise of guardianship. Family heirlooms that had been with us for generations. Gone. When I asked questions, the answers were always the same. It's for your own good. Ellie, you're too young to understand. Too young. I had been forced to grow up overnight. Too young was a luxury I no longer had. One evening, not long after we moved into the townhouse, I overheard something that erased all doubt. I had gone to the kitchen to fetch water, and from the study I heard Edward's voice, low but urgent. "They'll never know. By the time Eleanor comes of age, everything will be tied up. The company, the estate sit, will all be mine. The siblings are just pawns. Do you understand? Pawns." My blood turned cold. I pressed myself against the wall, heart racing, trying to steady my breathing. Every word was a dagger. He wasn't just greedy, he was calculating, cruel, and willing to erase us completely if it meant securing power. That night, lying awake with Sarah's small body curled against mine, I made a vow. If he thought we were pawns, he was wrong. I wasn't just a grieving girl anymore. I was a protector, and I would fight back in whatever way I could, even if the world didn't believe me. But fighting back wasn't easy. I was 17 with no legal authority, no money, and no allies. Edward controlled everything on paper. He had lawyers, accountants, even local officials in his pocket. What did I have? Only my wits, my will, and the determination not to let my siblings be swallowed by his greed. The years that followed were a storm. Daniel grew restless under Edward's control. He hated him more openly than I did. He would slam doors, talk back, and once even shouted, "You're not our father, and you never will be." Edward's face darkened that day in a way I'll never forget. A sharp slap followed, and Daniel came to me that night with red eyes, whispering, "One day, Ellie, I'll make him pay." Sarah, meanwhile, grew quieter. She retreated into books and her drawings, often sketching our old house, our parents, or the roses mother had loved so much. I encouraged her, praised her, and told her to never let anyone take her dreams. Because deep down, I feared Edward would crush even those and me. I took odd jobs where I could, tutoring younger kids, sewing clothes for neighbors, even working late nights in a bakery to stash away coins that Edward didn't know about. It was a small rebellion, but every coin I saved felt like a seed of hope. I also started studying finance and law in secret. I devoured books from the library, teaching myself how businesses worked, how contracts were written, how men like Edward manipulated paper and signatures to rob others. Knowledge, I realized, was the one weapon he couldn't take from me. Still, the betrayals kept coming. By the time I turned 18, Edward had drained nearly every account. He sold off lands my father had promised would be Daniel's one day. He liquidated stocks my mother had carefully invested in. When I confronted him, voice shaking with rage, he sneered at me. "Your father trusted me. You should too. You're just a girl with fantasies of control. Learn your place." I wanted to scream, but instead I bit my tongue and bided my time. Because I understood something. If I fought him openly, I would lose. But if I waited, quietly building strength, the day would come when his arrogance would be his undoing. It wasn't until Sarah's 13th birthday that I finally saw a crack in his armor. She had asked for a simple cake, nothing fancy, just something we could share as siblings. Edward scoffed at the idea, calling it a waste of money. But later that night, I noticed his study door ajar. Inside, he was drunk, papers scattered across the desk. I crept closer and saw documents, false accounts, forged signatures, deals that would have sent him to prison if exposed. My hands trembled as I flipped through them, memorizing every detail. It was then I realized he wasn't untouchable. He was reckless, arrogant, and blinded by greed. If I could gather enough proof, one day I could take everything back. But fate wasn't finished testing us. When I turned 21, Edward announced he was sending Daniel to a boarding school to make a man of him. In reality, it was to break his spirit. Daniel begged me not to let him go, tears streaming down his face. But I had no power to stop it. Watching him leave that morning, his small suitcase in hand, nearly destroyed me. Sarah clung to me, whispering, "Ellie, don't let him take me too." I promised her I wouldn't. And for years, I kept that promise. I shielded Sarah as best I could, keeping her focused on school, encouraging her art, reminding her every day that she was more than Edward's pawn. At night when she slept, I would pore over Edward's papers, making copies in secret, hiding them in places he would never think to look. My rebellion grew small but steady, and then came the turning point. It was a rainy evening, thunder shaking the windows. Edward had been drinking more heavily than usual, his temper shorter, his words sharper. He stumbled into the kitchen where Sarah and I were preparing dinner. His voice slurred. "You think you're clever, Eleanor? Always watching, always questioning. You think I don't see it? You'll never win. All of this belongs to me." Something in me snapped. I turned to face him, fire in my chest. "No, Edward. It belongs to us. And one day, everyone will know the truth." For a moment, silence hung in the air. Then he laughed a cruel, hollow laugh that made my skin crawl. But behind that laugh, I saw fear. He knew. He knew I wasn't the same frightened girl anymore that night. As Sarah and I huddled in our room, I whispered to her, "Hold on, little one. Just hold on. I promise you, one day we'll take it all back. Every single thing he stole." And for the first time in years, I believed it. Because betrayal may break you, but it also teaches you how to rise. And I was ready to rise. The older I grew, the more I understood that survival wasn't just about food or money. It was about protecting the fire inside me from being snuffed out. For years, Edward had tried to control us through fear, stripping us of wealth, dignity, and even hope. But slowly, quietly, I was building something he couldn't see. Sarah grew into a bright young woman under my watch. She was 16 now, with long auburn hair that caught the light just like our mother's. She was gifted in art, pouring her heart into sketches and paintings, often telling me, "Ellie, one day I'll paint us free." Her words were poetry, but behind them was the quiet desperation of a child who longed for a home, for safety, for parents we could never have back. Daniel, though far away at boarding school, managed to send me letters, coded ones. We devised little tricks, like substituting certain words so Edward wouldn't understand if he intercepted them. Daniel wrote about how he despised the manipulation, how he planned to study law so one day he could fight Edward in the only arena that mattered, the courtroom. His determination was fuel for me. My siblings weren't broken. They were scarred, yes, but they were strong. Meanwhile, I found work in a small accounting office. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. More importantly, it gave me access to knowledge contracts, balance sheets, tax forms. Numbers became a language, and I learned to read between the lines. Every evening, after long hours at the office, I would come home and apply what I learned to Edward's documents, the copies I had hidden away. Slowly, the puzzle came together. Offshore accounts, shell companies, bribes to city officials. The picture was clear. Edward had built his empire on lies. But knowing it and proving it were two very different things. I needed leverage, evidence strong enough to crumble his entire foundation. And I couldn't act too soon. One wrong step and he would crush me before I had the chance to fight. One cold winter night, while Sarah sketched quietly by the fireplace, I confided in her. "I'm going to take him down, Sarah. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. And when I do, you'll have everything back that he stole from us." Her eyes widened. "Ellie, that's dangerous. He's cruel. What if he hurts you?" I took her hand. "He already hurt us, Sarah. But if I let him win, if I let him erase who we are, then he takes more than our wealth. He takes our souls. And I can't allow that." Sarah nodded slowly, tears brimming in her eyes. "Then I'll help, however I can." And she did. Over the next few years, Sarah's art became more than just an escape ed, became a shield. She won scholarships, grants, and soon enough she was accepted into an art institute. Edward scoffed at the idea, calling it a waste of resources. But I secretly encouraged her. Her independence was a form of resistance. Every accolade she earned was proof that we weren't the helpless children he wanted us to be. Meanwhile, Daniel returned from boarding school at 18, taller, sharper, with a resolve that startled even me. The boy who once slammed doors in rage had become a man with quiet fire in his eyes. "I'm ready, Ellie," he said one evening. "I've been studying law, contracts, everything. If we move carefully, we can build a case against him." Hearing those words felt like watching a seed bloom after years underground. We weren't alone anymore. Together, the three of us formed a silent alliance. Sarah painted, Daniel studied, and I continued gathering evidence. Late at night, we'd whisper in hushed tones, planning, strategizing, imagining a future where Edward's grip was broken. But fate, as always, tested us first. Edward's drinking worsened. His cruelty sharpened. One night, he stumbled into the house raging, accusing me of poisoning the children against him. He grabbed me by the arm, his nails digging into my skin. For a moment, I thought he might kill me. But then Daniel stepped forward, fists clenched, voice steady. "Touch her again, and you'll regret it." Edward's face twisted, but for the first time, he backed down. He knew Daniel wasn't a boy anymore. He was a man, and one he couldn't intimidate so easily. That moment shifted everything. We weren't pawns in his game anymore. We were players in our own right. The years passed, and with every one, our quiet rebellion grew louder. I managed to secure a job at a prestigious law firm as a junior assistant thanks to my self-taught skills. There, I gained access to resources, mentors, and most importantly, the ability to dig deeper into Edward's fraudulent empire. I'll never forget this night I found the smoking gun. I was filing old case records when I came across a familiar name buried in the archives. Edwards, a lawsuit from years back, settled quietly with money, involving a forged deed. My heart raced as I copied every page, combined with the documents I had already gathered. It painted a damning picture. That night, I spread the papers across the floor of my small apartment, Daniel beside me, Sarah leaning over the table. My hands trembled as I whispered, "This is it. This is how we take him down." Daniel grinned, though his eyes were fierce. "We'll need a strategy. We can't just go to the police. He'll buy his way out. We need allies, the press, maybe even federal investigators." Sarah added softly and timing, "If we move too soon, he'll bury us. But if we wait until the right moment." I looked at them, pride swelling in my chest. "Then we'll not only reclaim what's ours, we'll make sure he never hurts anyone else again. For the first time in years." Hope didn't feel like a distant dream. It felt like a promise. Still, hope didn't pay the bills. There were nights when I came home bone-tired, hands raw from work, only to find Sarah crying because Edward had mocked her art, or Daniel raging because Edward had tried to manipulate him. But every time I reminded them and myself that these were battles on the way to victory, and slowly, victory began to show itself. Daniel earned a place at law school. Sarah's paintings started selling, not for much, but enough to help. I continued to rise in the firm, earning trust and respect. And through it all, we built a small fund to gather a secret pool of money hidden from Edward, meant for the day we would strike. That day came sooner than I expected. One evening, I received a call from an old accountant who had once worked for my father. His voice was shaky, filled with guilt. "Eleanor," he said, "I've carried this secret too long. Edward made me falsify records after your parents died. It was fraud, plain and simple. I still have copies." I nearly dropped the phone. After years of scraping together pieces, here was a man handing me the missing puzzle pieces. With trembling hands, I took the files he gave me. They were explosive proof that Edward had siphoned millions through fake trusts, that he had staged deals, and even that he had ties to the very accident that killed my parents. The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. To see it in black and white, to know my parents' deaths weren't just tragic, but orchestrated, set me ablaze with rage. But I also felt clarity. This wasn't just about wealth anymore. This was about justice. That night, as I sat with Daniel and Sarah, I laid out the papers. My voice shook, but it was steady. This is it. This isn't just fraud, it's murder. He planned it all. Daniel clenched his fists, eyes burning. "Then we end this." "For good," Sarah whispered through tears. "For Mom and Dad." And I nodded. "For all of us." The storm was coming in this time. I was ready to fight in the open. The day of reckoning didn't come with lightning or thunder. It came quietly, in the stillness of a spring morning. When the evidence we had been gathering for years was finally ready to see the light of day. I was 50 by then. The wrinkles around my eyes told a story of sleepless nights, but the fire in my heart was stronger than ever. Sarah was an established artist. Her paintings featured in galleries that Edward could never touch. Daniel had graduated law school, sharp and determined, with a network of allies who believed in his fight. And me, I was no longer the terrified girl clutching my siblings after a funeral. I had become the guardian, the fighter, the survivor. And I was ready to become the victor. We began carefully. Daniel reached out to a federal investigator he trusted, a woman who had once prosecuted high-profile fraud cases. Her name was Linda Carver, a nonsense kind of woman with steel-gray eyes and a reputation for never backing down. When Daniel first showed her the files, she leaned back in her chair and said, "If even half of this is true, your uncle is finished." It was the first time in decades I felt the weight of justice tilt in our favor. Linda didn't waste time. She organized a small task force, swore us to secrecy, and began digging into Edward's empire with surgical precision. I'll never forget the moment she looked me dead in the eye and said, "Mrs. Whitmore, men like your uncle thrive because people are too afraid to fight them. You've done the hard part already. You survived. Now let us take care of the rest." Still, survival had taught me one lesson, above all, never underestimate the enemy. Edward must have sensed something shifting. He grew erratic, paranoid, barking orders at his staff, calling us late at night with empty threats. "I made you who you are. Eleanor," he sneered once over the phone. "Without me, you'd be nothing. Don't bite the hand that feeds you." I laughed a sound I didn't expect to escape my lips. "You never fed me, Edward. You tried to starve me, but I learned to hunt." And then I hung up. That was the last time he ever tried to intimidate me. The investigation stretched for months, each day peeling away another layer of Edward's corruption. Offshore accounts, bribery, tax evasion, even ties to organized crime. It was all there. Every page felt like vindication, like proof that my parents hadn't raised fools, but fighters. Finally, the day came when Linda told us, "It's time." The federal team staged simultaneous raids on Edward's offices, his lavish estate, even his so-called charities that were nothing more than money laundering fronts. The news broke across every channel that evening. Prominent businessmen under federal investigation for fraud, corruption, and possible ties to suspicious deaths. I sat in our modest living room, watching his empire crumble live on television, Sarah clutching my hand, Daniel pacing with restless energy. When the cameras showed Edward being let out in handcuffs, his once-proud face twisted in fury and fear. I felt something I hadn't felt since I was a child. Peace. But the story didn't end there. The trial was long, grueling, filled with accusations, denials, and attempts to twist the truth. Edward hired the best lawyers money could buy, but Daniel was relentless. He cross-examined witnesses, dismantled lies, and presented the evidence we had gathered with surgical precision. I took the stand myself, recounting the years of fear, the stolen inheritance, the forged documents. My voice shook, but it didn't break. I looked Edward in the eye and told him, "You may have taken my parents, my home, and my childhood, but you didn't take my soul. And today, the world will finally see you for what you are." The courtroom was silent, for the first time in decades. Edward had no power over me. When the verdict came guilty on multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy, I felt decades of weight lift from my shoulders. He was sentenced to decades in prison, stripped of his fortune, his reputation destroyed. But justice wasn't just about his downfall. It was about what came after. With Edward gone, the wealth he had stolen was untangled through endless legal processes. Some of it was gone forever, wasted on his greed, but enough was recovered to restore our family's legacy. The estate, once rotting under his shadow, came back into our hands. Sarah transformed it into an art foundation, a place where young artists without resources could find shelter and inspiration. Daniel built a legal clinic to help families crushed by financial predators like Edward and me. I finally had the chance to live, not just survive. I started speaking publicly, sharing my story with women who thought they had no strength left. At first it was small community gatherings, but soon I was invited to conferences, interviews, even podcasts. I stood on stages, gray hair and all, and told them, "Your life is not over at 50, 60, or even 70. Betrayal may break you, but it can also build you. You have wisdom, resilience, and power you don't even know yet. Don't wait for someone to save. You save yourself. Because the lessons we learn over a lifetime, those are the tools that will set us free." Every time I said those words, I saw eyes in the crowd light up. Women nodding, tears streaming, hope sparking where there had been none. That became my mission. I wasn't just Eleanor Whitmore, the orphaned girl who lost everything. I was Eleanor Whitmore, the woman who rebuilt, who fought, who won. And I tell you this here and now because I know someone out there feels broken the way I once did. Maybe you're watching this and thinking, I don't have the strength anymore. But you do. Trust me, you do. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Because together we are stronger than betrayal, stronger than greed, stronger than the shadows of our past. And remember this, justice doesn't always come swiftly. But if you hold on, if you fight smart, it does come. And when it does, tastes sweeter than anything money could ever buy.